All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Stacy Cowop. I am a Princeton Review teacher, tutor, and a senior developer in the maths and sciences. Today, we're going to take a little bit of time and talk to you about the AP math exams that are going to occur in May timeframe. So again, my name's Stacy Cowop. Our agenda for today is we're going to talk about why one might want to take an AP exam, understanding about what's on the exams and what they're composed of, and then a little bit about how to prepare for them. All right. Primarily, our issue today is just to get you familiar. Most of you are potentially taking AP exams and, make sure you're comfortable with what's going to happen in May, how they're going to test you, and talk about the details associated with that. So let's start with the main question about why should I take an AP exam? Right? One of the main reasons we want to take an AP exam is we can earn college credit. And the thing about college credit is most colleges will not give you physical credits if you don't complete the credits at their institution. But usually what can happen is you can get credit for a required course that you need before moving on to another course. So if I want to major in math at college and, Calculus 1 is my first required course, if I take, you know, Calc AP, I may be able to satisfy the requirement at the school for my first semester of calculus class. Most schools require you to have a 3 or higher, right? Some of them, in addition to requiring you to have a 3 or higher, sometimes they'll even make you take a test on site when you come in to the school to kind of verify your standing. So you always want to check and see what each school's requirement is. Once you've, applied, you know where you're going, then be really deliberate with that school in terms of, okay, here's my AP exams, here's the classes, the tests that I took, here's my scores on them. What do I have to do to essentially place out of the introductory class? What do I want to do to place into an advanced class? So this is a way that I can spend less time in the big classes that everybody's taking in, sort of our first and second semesters. And I can get to my more advanced, especially if math is one of my more advanced, and potentially graduate sooner. If I can eliminate, 4 or 5 introductory classes, that's like a semester. And I can pay one semester less while I'm at college, and we all know how expensive college is. So AP exams allow me to place out of introductory classes and move into some of the more advanced classes. Again, the one thing you'll have to check is every school has a certain minimum number of credits you have to do while you're at that school. And you generally don't, your AP exam doesn't give you credits for taking a class at that school. So you have to balance all that out. You also may decide that maybe I did really well in one AP exam and I want to place out of the introductory class, but maybe I did a 3 and I'm not so comfortable with one of my other AP exams. And maybe I don't want to move into the second semester course competing against some of those other students. And maybe I do want to take that introductory class. So you have to decide what's best for you. And talking to most students have a teacher that helps guide them in their first year, talking to your teacher in terms of what's best for you at this school. Right. And, if I take it and I get a really high score, like an A, maybe that helps my GPA. So there's sometimes reasons you want to retake a class you've done. Sometimes there's reason to skip over it and move on. It all depends on your individual scores and circumstances. Right. But anything that can potentially help me get out of those introductory classes and maybe graduate in 3.5 years or 3 years in the end is cheaper and college is expensive. So that's something we want to consider. And we want to, our parents, I'm sure, also want to hear about those kind of considerations. So now, for this year, 2025, you see on the screen, I've put up the 4 math AP exam dates. All right, the first one being offered is statistics on Thursday, May 8th. Notice how they're all at 8 a.m. local. We have calculus AB and calculus BC on Monday, May 12th. They're both at 8 a.m. local. And to be clear, AP exams start at one of 2 times. Your school kicks it off between 8 and 9 a.m. local time, or between 12 and 1 p.m. local time. All right, it doesn't have to start immediately at 8 a.m. All right, as long as it's kicked off between 8 and 9 or 12 and 1. So this way, students are all basically in their exams at certain times. I as a New Yorker can't call to the West Coast and talk to someone, on the same day with the exams. That's part of what's going on also. Please also notice that the calculus AB exam and the calculus BC exam are offered at exactly the same time on Monday, May 12th. And the College Board has done that intentionally because they are very specific. You cannot take both AB and BC calculus tests the same year. So let's talk a little bit about what's different between calculus AB and calculus BC, and I'm going to follow it up with some slides and be a little bit more specific with the details. But calculus AB is the equivalent of like a 1 semester calculus course, where calculus BC is the equivalent of like 2 semesters or a 1-year calculus course. So calculus BC has more content in it that's tested. And even though BC tests some of the same subjects, it's not distributed in terms of the same percentages across the test, right? But BC is definitely the harder, more difficult test, covers more content, and you are not allowed to take both AB and BC in the same year, right? And then there's the pre-calculus test offered on Tuesday, May 13th. All right, and we'll talk a little bit about, again, what's pre-calculus versus calculus. I put statistics up here just so that these are the 4 mathematics AP exams. And I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about what's covered in each of them so that you can see the difference between what one of them covers versus what one of the other one covers. Okay, but all the math tests are in the morning. So let's talk about scoring. AP exams are ranked high 5, 4, 3, 2, down to 1 as the lowest score. And College Board says 5 means you're extremely well qualified. They like to say that's like an A or better, an A plus. A 4 is considered very well qualified. A minus, B plus, or a B. 3, qualified, B minus, C plus, or C. 2, possibly qualified, and if you score a 1, they're saying they have no recommendation. Now, most schools will look at 3 and above, and some schools will look at 4 and above in terms of allowing you to place out of some of the introductory classes. Again, that's something where schools are a little bit different. Some schools require the 4 or the 5. Some schools will allow you to place out with a 3. Some schools will recommend if you got a 3, we think you should take the introductory class. We aren't quite sure if placing out is in your best interests. So again, you want to talk to the teacher who's kind of acting as your advisor for your freshman year. If I place out of the introductory class, and I got a 3, how competitive are the students? How hard is that second semester class? All right, one of the things they can usually tell you from the school, if students who got a B minus, a C, or a C plus in the first semester course, how well do they do in the second semester class? This is a reason if you got a 3, even though you're qualified and they might allow you to place out, they might tell you that, well, students who get a B minus, a C plus, or a C in the first semester tend to not do well in the second semester, and 25% of them may have to retake the class. There's an instance where it might be in your best interests for you to retake the introductory class so that you refresh some of those ideas, and it hasn't been a year or so since you've seen them going into that second level class. So those are one of the things you want to get a good reading on from teachers that are at the school, familiar with the classes, how difficult they are, how competitive the students are. Do the students work together? Are they willing, to form study groups? Are the students very competitive and not? So you have to sort of get a feel for how things work at the school. That's one of the places where the advisor at the school is very important. So the AP3 is the one that you want to be very conscious of. If I skip out of this introductory class, is that going to hurt me in the next level class? Where this might be a case where I might want to take the introductory class even if I've got the 3 and qualified to come out of it. All right, I want to see how that's going to affect my following score, because my GPA, especially if I'm doing something like trying to go to med school where I have to keep a GPA, in the high 4s, getting a B is not a good thing. So follow-on plans matter, especially if med school is one of your objectives in terms of what I want to do with my undergraduate, right? So these are the things that affect those decisions in terms of automatically I may not, or I may place out of that introductory class. Okay, enough about that. All right, let's talk about the exams themselves. What's on them? What are they looking to test from you? All right. The purpose is, okay, it's a consistent test offered across the United States so that they can verify that an introductory course taught in one school taught the student the same content at the same level as an introductory course taught at a different school. Right? Different schools have different rigor and degree, and so the purpose of this is to verify that if you took a calculus AB class, this exam verifies that you know the material that they expect you to know after that class. So let's talk about calculus AB. And what we're talking about here is, what are the topics, all right? What's tested in the calculus AB test? So limits and continuity, differentiation, so the basics, how to differentiate the fundamental properties of differentiation. Notice on the next level, it's composite, implicit, and inverse functions, so another level of differentiation. Then they're going to take differentiation and apply it to certain contexts and certain types of problems. All right, then we're going to do analytical application of differentiation. So notice again, limits and continuity, and I now have 4 different topics associated with differentiating. Then we go to integration and accumulation of change. Notice the differential equations and the basic, okay, take integration now and apply it to certain types of problems. This is the material for calculus AB. Right? So in order to do well on calculus AB, I have to be competent, conversant, and capable in all of these areas. Right? And if we look at these different areas from a testing perspective, and we kind of look at the weighting of the exam. The first two, limits and continuity, differentiation, definitions, and the fifth, applications of integrations. So one, all right, the first one, whoops, sorry guys, the first one, the second one, and the eighth one are about 10 to 12 or 15% of the test. The third, composite, implicit, and inverse functions for differentiation, is 9 to 13%. Right? Contextual application of differentiation, about 10 to 15% again. Applying derivatives to analytical applications. So that analytical applications of differentiation, 15 to 18%. Integration and accumulation of change, 17 to 20%. All right, differential equations, 6 to 12. So most of these are 10 to 12 or 15%, except for analytical applications of differentiation, integration and accumulation of change are more heavily weighted. All right, so do I understand when I apply differentiation to a certain type of problem, what's happening? And okay, if we've got integration, how is change occurring? Right? Those are the two big areas that are tested under A/B calculus. Right? But you'll see problems from all of these areas. What I want to do is I want to contrast this with BC calculus. All right? BC being the longer year-long course with more content being tested. If I flip to the BC units, right, limits and continuity, differentiation, definition of fundamental properties, different composite, you'll see this all looks very similar, right? Integration, accumulation, change, differential equations, application of integration. These are the same topics from AB calculus. What's different from AB calculus is now we're going to do some parametric equations, polar coordinates, some vectors and functions, infinite sequences and series. All right, so the last two units are unique to BC calculus and are not tested in AB calculus. Now, you kind of look at that and say, well, if they're testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the first 8 are the same and the last 2 are different, isn't it very similar in terms of what the test is? No. What's different in BC calculus is the percentages in terms of how much of the test is in this area. So the first 4, limits and continuity, differentiation definitions, differentiation, composite, implicit, and inverse, contextual applications. Those are only 4 to 8% of the test each. So for the first 4 areas, there's very few questions in those areas, as opposed to AB calculus, they're all running at 10 to 12 or 15%. So what's different in the tests is how much of each area is being tested. All right, the big areas for BC calculus, all right, if we apply, let's see, if we're doing the analytical applications, we go up to about 10%. Integration and accumulation of change is the same in both. It's about 17 to 20%. Right? Differential equations, again, 6 to 9. Applications of integration, 6 to 9. It's the last 2 areas, the parametric equations, polar coordinates, vector values, infinite sequences and series. Parametric equations, polar coordinates, vector valued functions, we're running about 10, 12% again. And then the infinite sequences and series, we're running just under 20%. So we're getting a fair number of questions from those last 2 parts. And we're getting much less of the first 4 areas on BC calculus versus AB calculus, right? So a lot of people look at these and say, oh, they look very similar. That's true. The units themselves, when you list them out, look very similar. How much of the test is centered in those different units is different. And that's where the test itself establishes the difference between AB and BC. How much is tested here? All right, so BC, the first 4 areas, very little. All right, let's talk a little bit about, okay, what about pre-calc? All right, pre-calc's going to do some polynomial and rational functions. They're going to do exponential and log functions. And they're doing a little bit of trig and polar functions. And the polar functions in pre-calc are at a very different level than the polar functions in BC calculus. All right, so this is pre-calc. This is all very much introduction, right, in terms of, and in this area, you're going to see polynomial and rational functions about 14 to 17%. Exponential and log functions are going to go 9 to 13%. So you want to say the first one about 15, the second one around 10. All right, trig and polar functions, we're talking exam weighting about 20% again. All right, and then, we'll see additional sorted. All right, you're going to see identity information. There's going to be equivalent representation. And then there's going to be applying results, supporting conclusions in terms of based on the information they give you, which of the following can be true. So this is very much lower level, all right, and is a standard pre-calculus course as offered by most high schools. And then the 4th math test in AP exam is statistics. And I just wanted to mention that because not everybody remembers that statistics is actually an AP exam. And statistics, they're going to do variation and distribution. They're going to be looking at patterns and uncertainty. And then this data-based predictions, decisions, and conclusions. All right, so basically what's happening in statistics is you have 1 variable data, you have 2 variable data, how you collect data, probability, random variables, and probability distributions, sampling distributions, inferences and properties, and then you have to be able to do inferences with means, inferences with chi-square, and then inferences for using slopes on quantitative data. All right, so this is what you want to be very clear if you're thinking about taking the AP statistics exam. This is a vigorous statistics course. This is not kind of, 3 chapters in your math book along with something else. All right, this is a full semester of statistics and probability and how we use probability to set up hypotheses and make decisions. So please make sure that you've had a strong statistics course and you're practicing. One of the key things you always want to do on AP exams is practice. Right, using the through your school. Now, remember to register for an AP exam, it has to go through your school. You as an individual can't actually register with College Board to take the AP exam. Not like taking the SAT or the PSAT. All right, I can only take the AP exam as part of my school, which is offering AP exams. All right, so even students that are homeschooled, you have to register through your local high school to take that AP exam. All right, you can't register as an individual student to take them. Part of that is also verifying the school is registered to give AP exams, and they also control your access to your AP content online for the College Board, which is information you absolutely want to be practicing with and practicing questions. And I'm sure most of your teachers are working you through that material. So again, what I want to talk about with these 4 exams, I want to talk about the structure of the exams, all right, kind of how they're put together and what you have to do. So if you notice on this slide, there's 2 sections. There's section 1, which is essentially your multiple choice questions. And then there's section 2, which are called free response questions. A little bit later, I'm going to show you some examples of what a free response question looks like. Think of free response question as kind of typical math questions where I have to write out my work and I get points for showing and justifying, what I did, what equation I used, what calculation I performed, what numbers I came up with. All right, so free response is kind of like what you're used to when you take a test with your teacher that says, okay, I want to see all your work and I'm going to grade you on the work that you did. So if you look at the tests, Calculus AB and Calculus BC have the same basic structure of the test. Section 1 is a multiple choice test. There's 45 questions in section 1. Right? I also want to be really clear that section 1 in both of these tests has 2 parts. There's a part A and a part B. And part A and part B are important because they affect whether you are allowed to use a calculator or not. Right? So for Calculus AB, and I have another slide on that, I'll get to that in a second. Notice I've got section 1, multiple choice, I've got 45 questions, and I have a total of 1 hour and 45 minutes. I have part A is 60 minutes, and I do 30 questions in 60 minutes, and then part B in section 1 is 45 minutes, and I have 15 questions in 45 minutes, and together, all those 45 questions are worth 50% of my total score. Both Calculus AB and Calculus BC have that same structure. Section 2, the free response questions, also has a part A and a part B. Once again, whether I can use my calculator or not is one of the reasons there's a part A and a part B. I'm allowed in one part, I'm not allowed in the other part. So both Calculus AB and Calculus BC, section 1 has 2 parts. Can use the calculator, can't use the calculator, and the same in section 2. So I have to be very conscious of where am I allowed to use the calculator, where am I not allowed. And it's not only allowed, but part of it I'm actually required to use my calculator. And they recommend graphing calculators. In the free response section, all right, in section 2, both of them are going to have 6 questions. Part A, all right, my graphing calculator is required. There's 2 questions in part A. I'm going to have 30 minutes to do those 2 questions. Then I'm going to have to put that calculator away for section 2, and I'm going to have 4 questions and 60 minutes to do those 4 questions. Again, all 6 of those questions together form 50% of the score. And that's how Calculus AB and Calculus BC. All right. And those 6 questions, I want to be really clear. Those 1 question in section 2, 1 free response question, is not the same as 1 multiple choice question. All right. 1 free response question can have many subparts, A, B, C, D, maybe even E and F occasionally on some of the longer ones. And even under one of the letters like C, I could have C1, little I could have C little I2. All right, I can even have parts under one of the letters, A, B, or C. So one of the things I have to be very careful with under section 2 in these tests is, did I answer all the parts? Even if I'm not sure about one of the parts, let me just write something down. Is there an equation I can write for this? And then let me go off and do other parts. All right, so the points are distributed through the different parts of the question. And you will be, there's a particular grading rubric for these so that they are all graded to the same rubric in terms of a point for this, a point for that. That's all decided prior to you taking the test. That's part of the development of the test. And then when your tests come in, the math teachers sit down and everybody grades to the same rubric. For pre-calculus, you can see that the question structure is very similar to the calculus. I have section 1 multiple choice. There's 40 questions. Again, part A and part B divides out into 28 and 12 questions. 120 minutes total. But notice how in the pre-calculus test, section 1 is more than 50% of the score. All right, those 40 questions are 62.5%. There's a heavier weighting on section 1 in pre-calculus. There's only 4 questions, 2 in part A, 2 in part B. In the free response questions, I only have an hour or 60 minutes. That's less than 50% of the score. And then for statistics, we're back to the sort of 50-50. 40 questions in an hour and 30 minutes, 50% of the test. Section 2, free response, again, it's 6 questions, just like calculus A, B, and BC. Have an hour and 30 minutes, again, it's 50% of the test. All right. The statistic breaks out a little differently. In calculus A, B, and BC, the 6 questions in the free response break out. Part A is 2 and part B is 4. Whereas in statistics, part A is 5 and part B is 1. So again, each test has some slight differences. All right. Your job is not to memorize all the different tests. Your job is to make sure you understand which test are you taking. All right. What are the parts for this test that I have to be cognizant of? And let's talk for a second about the calculator. All right. So I took this is the AB exam. All right, A, B, and BC, calculus AB and calculus BC are exactly the same in how they divide up section 1 and section 2. So if you notice on section 1, part A, we've got 30 of the 45 multiple choice questions. We have 60 minutes, and there's no calculator allowed. This is all work that you have to do. Notice there's also no guessing penalty. Let me be very clear what a guessing penalty is. A guessing penalty means if I get an answer wrong, they take points away. There are no points on this test that are deducted for a wrong answer. You only get points if you are correct. So one of the things that we always want to do on this test is never leave any of the multiple choice blank, never leave any part of the free response questions blank. Write something down. If it's wrong, they're not going to take anything away. And who knows, I may have written an equation that's relevant. I might get a point for it. All right. So do not ever leave a multiple choice question blank. Always put something in and always put something down on every part of the free response. So section A, 30 out of the 45 questions. Part A in section 1, no calculator. Part B in section 1, your last 15 multiple choice questions, you have 45 minutes. Your calculator is not only allowed, it's absolutely required. All right. And again, they're generally expecting you to bring in a graphing calculator. For section 2, the free response questions, the first 30 minutes are 2 of the 6 questions. And for those 2 questions, you have 30 minutes. And again, the graphing calculator is required. For part B of section 2, you have 4 free response questions. You've got 60 minutes and your calculator is not required. Right? So does it make sense, folks, that the questions that the calculators not only allowed but required are going to involve some more complicated mathematical manipulations, things that you can't do easily kind of with pencil and paper. Right? And that's why in part B of section 1, you have 45 minutes for 15 questions, because it's going to take some work with the calculator to get some of these answers. In section 2, part A, you have 2 free response questions in 30 minutes. It's going to take some use of the calculator in order to get the answers. All right, so that's why the timing is not the same in parts A and part B in section 1 and section 2. All right. The calculator required sections tend to be specifically involved and manipulative that you can't do easily with pencil and paper and are going to take some time to do. And we want to make sure we know what we have to do, make sure we're practicing with the calculator with the right sections so that I know what I have to do at the right time to answer the question. Now let's talk about, we've talked about why I might want to take an AP exam. We've talked a little bit about the structure of the tests. Now let's talk a little bit about, you hear me talking about, we always want to be practicing. I know most teachers spend a lot of time in this spring area having you guys practice stuff from the fall. All right, practice, as we get into April, teachers do a lot of practice as opposed to teaching new material so that you guys are used to and know what to expect with the exams. But let's talk a little bit about preparing for them. Multiple choice questions. All right. We have something at Princeton we call letter of the day. And this slide didn't show up right. Right? One of the things we do with letter of the day is when people are guessing, and you're going to guess an answer choice, all right? All of your answers have 4 possible choices. And when people are guessing, they sometimes think hard about, okay, should I pick A here? Should I pick B here? Should I pick C here? Should I pick... We don't want you guys to spend a lot of time. Most people start kind of Christmas treeing. Oh, let me pick A here, B here, C here, D here, and then come back. They start kind of drawing little diagrams with the letters. The thing we want you to do, if you're guessing, we don't want you to spend a whole lot of time on a question you're not sure of. So we want you to, at the beginning of the test, if I literally have to guess and I can't eliminate any answer choices and I'm looking at a question and I just have to literally guess, because remember we said don't leave anything blank, we want you to pick A, B, C, or D. And every time you guess, put the same letter in, because we don't want you to spend a lot of time thinking about what should I put here. All right, whatever you put in the one before it or the one after it, College Board is very particular about making sure there's no known patterns in the answer choices. Right, so if I start patterning things, I don't do so well. So at the same time, if I have a 1 out of 4 chance of guessing right, if I keep guessing, if I decide my letter of the day is A, and I have 4 that I'm guessing on, if I guess A all 4 times, one of them is likely to be right. So we like to recommend the letter of the day. We say, just pick a letter. If you're flat out guessing, put the same letter in each time, because every, 25% of the time you're probably going to hit on the right answer. We also recommend what's called a 2-pass system. And what we mean by a 2-pass system is, when I'm in a certain section of the test, I want to do the questions in that section that I know how to do first. So if I'm facing a question, I'm like, I have no idea how to do this, that's what we're going to call a later question. I'm going to put a little circle around it on my paper. I'm going to move on. I want to answer the now questions first. I want to do the questions I know how to do first, and the questions that I think are easy and straightforward to do first. I don't want to pick up maybe, 10 questions in, there's maybe a long, detailed question. It's kind of worth the same number of points as all the other multiple choice questions. So I kind of want to skip over that for now. I want to get everything I know how to do and the easy ones done first. Then I'll come back through a second time and say, okay, now let me try the harder stuff that I'm not so sure that I know what to do. I'm saving my time-consuming questions. I'm saving what's harder for me. But I want to go through that whole section that I'm allowed to work on right now. And I want to get the questions I know how to do done first. And then I'll go back through. So that's a 2-pass system. I'm going to go through that section of the test twice. Pick up the stuff I know how to do first, skip over the stuff I'm not so sure of, then come back to those. And if at the end I'm not sure, I'm going to put my letter of the day in. And I'm always going to guess. I'm not going to leave a multiple choice question empty ever. All right, I have a 25% chance of guessing correctly on a multiple choice. I always want to do that. All right, so because we're telling you potentially to skip a question if you're not sure of it, keep track of what you've done and what you've not done. Best way to do that is on the test paper itself. All right, if you're constantly bubbling in, you might skip a line by accident or not skip a line if you skipped a question. All right, so I personally don't like to do the bubbling in as I'm taking the test because it takes some time. Let me do the questions, let me work on the questions, let me work through them first. Then, if I have maybe between my first and second pass, or if there's like 15 minutes left, let me go ahead and get my bubbling in so that I know what I've got done and what else maybe I haven't done yet. Now, there's another thing in that even if you don't know an answer to a question, you might be able to get rid of answers that you know are wrong. So I want to show you what we call process of elimination. All right, so the question on the left asks, what's the capital of Malawi? All right, I have no idea what the capital of Malawi is off the top of my head. I do not know. But if I look at the answer choices, I know Paris is not the capital of Malawi. I know London is not the capital of Malawi, and I know Amsterdam is not the capital of Malawi. So through the process of elimination, it's not A, B, or C. So I'm going to go ahead and take D because 3 of these answers I know are wrong. So I can always sometimes get to the right answer by saying, well, are any of these answers that I see clearly wrong? All right, and a lot of times College Board is very good at, on a math test, having answer choices that are common mistakes we make and maybe partial answers that aren't complete. And if I can recognize some of them that way, I can say, okay, it's not that one, it's not that one. Maybe I get down to a 50-50 choice, which is better than 1 out of 4. So consider, if you're not sure of what the answer is there anything I know is wrong? And I can eliminate that answer as one that I should take. All right, so process of elimination. Narrow down your choices. Look for things that are wrong and eliminate them. Also be very clear. If part of that answer or one word in that answer choice is wrong, that answer is wrong. Everything in that answer must be correct. And do not ever leave anything blank, especially a multiple choice. All right, if I pick a random letter, I have a 25% chance of getting it right. Always put something in every multiple choice answer. Let's talk about the free response questions. Free response questions, what I call sort of working out all the details, are going to ask you things like why or show or, so I have to explain and I have to justify where this answer came from. If the answer is 5, I can't just write 5. I have to show on my test paper what did the 5 derive from. All right. I want to only use the space I need. If they've given me a whole page and I only need 3 lines, don't fill it up. Just write what you need to write to go from the start of the question to the answer. All right. Make sure that you've read the question carefully and all of the subparts. So question 2 might have parts A through E. Okay, I did A and B, I skipped C, I did D and E. Don't forget to put something written down in C. Can I write an equation here that might apply? I always want to see, is there something I can write that might get me a half a point or a point? All right, anytime. I don't want to leave things blank. And I don't want to, by accident, something that I skipped. All right, I don't want to potentially miss something. All right, so for the free response questions, all right, section 2 is half. Again, there's part A and part B for can I use a calculator or not. All right. And what I wanted to show you here on the screen is kind of an example of a free response question. Notice how they're giving me a question, they're giving me a function for how I model All right, a rate modeled by the function t for the passengers on a subway. They tell me the function is in passengers per minute, t is in minutes, so I know my units. And then they tell me that I've got this function g of t, how passengers board the subway. So I've got a function for them leaving, I've got a function for them boarding, and then notice I have parts A, B, C, and D. So answer A says how many passengers leave the subway during the time interval 0 to 20. I've got to remember, okay, leave the subway, that's function t. So I've got to figure out I'm only using time 0 through 20 in f of t. B asks for the first differential, f prime of 20. And then notice it says using the correct units, explain the meaning in the context of the problem. Now be careful here. You know, the first derivative deals, right, on first derivatives, we're going to give us potentially critical points in a function, right? It tells us where things are rising or falling, potential relative, local, or ultimate maximum or minima. But notice it says in the context of this problem. The words I just used in terms of critical points, rising or falling, max or min, that's in a calculus context. The context of this problem talks about passengers leaving and boarding the subway. Since we're talking about f of t, this is leaving the subway, I've got to take that first derivative and talk about what that first derivative tells me about passengers leaving a subway relative to that function. So please make sure in the context of this problem is a key phrase. I have to answer that question relative to the problem they've given me. And I can't just talk about calculus like, oh, minimum, maximum, critical points, rising. That's not in the context of the problem they've been given. All right, so notice in A and D it says round to the nearest passenger. All right. Notice in C, they say is the number of passengers on the subway increasing or decreasing at time t equals 20. Then they say justify your reason. Justify your reason. I can't just write increasing or decreasing. I didn't justify why I think it's increasing or decreasing. So now I have to come in and say, well, how do I know if it's increasing or decreasing? So I've got to talk about potentially how many are leaving the subway, how many are, it was function g of t, how many are boarding the subway, and I have to go from there. So with your free response questions, please, please be very careful about reading what they're asking for. All right, what do I have to answer here? Did they ask me to justify it? So I have to explain where that came from. How do I know it's increasing or decreasing? All right, so the free response questions, we always have to be very focused on what's said, what's been given to me, what's been asked. And I have to answer that question as given. I don't want to, write a paragraph about it. But if the number of passengers are increasing, tell me why. Well, function f of t, function g of t, I did this and this, so therefore I know it's increasing. Right? It can be a simple sentence, but I have to answer the question. Right? And so those were some example questions. You can see they asked me for dy dx. This is an implicit derivative because I got y's and x's here. So I have to know how to do that. All right, we're going to take integration of e to the sine. Notice that we've got volumes. All right, volume of the solid. All right, so now I have a solid revolving around. So the key, these tests are very content driven. All right, you've got to know the material they're testing you on. All right, there's still standardized tests though, especially half the test is multiple choice. So some of our strategies on what we do with multiple choice questions are applicable. So we want to make sure we know everything that we've been taught in content that we're being tested on, and then we want to be very conscious of what else can I do to help myself. All right. Again, my name is Stacy Cowop. My email address is on the screen. I'm a teacher. I'm a tutor. I'm a senior developer at Princeton Review. I do AP Physics development, so I help us develop the tests we do. And let's go ahead and see, do we have any questions that anybody would like to ask that I can answer for anybody?
We do. We have one question in the Q&A. And Stacy, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation today. I hope this has been helpful for all of you attending. So our question, do you get partial credit on the second section, the FRQs, on a problem?
Yes. The the rubric assigns so many points to each part of the FRQ. So part A, notice the one I showed you had part A, B, C, and D. There are certain points assigned to part A, part B, part C, and part D. So I can get points on part B and C, but not get points for A and D. And the other thing you can do when you have a question like that is, if part B and C build on something from A, you can say in B, well, assume the answer to A was this. Then I go ahead and then you can just take the question from that point so that you show you know what to do if you start with an answer there. So I might lose points or not get any points for A, but assuming it's like, okay, if the answer was this, then I know that I have to do this for B, I could potentially get all the points for B.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. And does that include half credits or half a point on a part, or is it only in full points?
They're usually only in full points. And again, that's all been decided ahead of time when the test was constructed in terms of what qualifies for, usually it's a point. They're usually not giving half points. So it's usually a point. You get 2 points here or 3 points is the combination of these tasks or equations or words or details. And that rubric has already been constructed before you take the test in May.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. If there are any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. If there are no questions, thank you all so much for joining today to learn more about how to prepare for these exams, which you'll be taking. We will stick around for any other questions that may come up, but otherwise have a wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you all for your time, and I wish you all the best.